Chief Engineer James Harrison stared at the flashing warning light on his console aboard Space Station Artemis 7, fighting the urge to roll his eyes. The station's primary maintenance AI had flagged yet another critical protocol violation. Someone had used a magnetic screwdriver without filing the proper electromagnetic tool usage forms in triplicate. Another day in paradise, he muttered, taking a sip from his contraband coffee mug. The station's regulatory council had recently passed a 15-page directive on proper beverage container handling procedures, but James couldn't bring himself to care. He had more important things to worry about, like keeping the massive space station's vital systems running. The station's intercoms crackled to life with the methodical voice of Administrator Zyxtao, the station's Procyon head of operations. Attention all personnel. The quarterly safety protocol review session will commence in 15 minutes. Attendance is mandatory for all species. Please bring your updated regulation manuals and at least 3 different colored marking implements for proper notation procedures. James glanced at his human maintenance team across the engineering bay. They shared knowing looks. They'd all received special dispensation to skip these meetings months ago after proving that somebody needed to actually keep the station running while everyone else spent hours discussing proper safety protocol formatting. The exemption had caused quite the stir among the station's alien administrators. The Proxians, with their crystalline bodies and rigid adherence to rules, had filed 17 different protests. The Meraxians, a species that looked like elegant floating jellyfish, had threatened to resign their posts in protest of such reckless endangerment of procedural integrity. But results spoke for themselves. Since implementing the human maintenance exemption, station efficiency had increased by 47%, and actual accidents had decreased. The aliens couldn't argue with the numbers, even if they spent countless hours in committees trying to explain them. A soft chime from his console interrupted James's thoughts. This time, the warning was real: pressure fluctuations in the station's atmospheric processing unit. He pulled up the diagnostic screen, his experienced eyes scanning the readings quickly. "Lily, Roman, we've got something weird in atmospheric processing," he called out to his team. "Looks like the main regulator is acting up." Lily Wong, the team's system specialist, was already moving. "On it, Chief. Want me to file a preliminary inspection request?" "No time," James replied, watching the pressure readings bounce erratically. "This needs eyes on it now. Roman, grab the toolkit, the real one, not the approved basic maintenance kit." Roman Martinez nodded, reaching under his workstation for a battered metal box that contained tools that would give Administrator Zyxtao a crystalline conniption if they knew about them. Tools that weren't strictly approved but had saved the station more times than James could count. As they headed for the maintenance shaft, the station's AI spoke up in its maddeningly calm voice. "Attention! Unauthorized maintenance activity detected. Please be advised that proper inspection protocols require minimum documentation of." James reached up and disconnected the AI's speaker in their section, another violation that would probably generate 20 pages of incident reports. But the pressure readings were getting worse, and he knew from experience that waiting for proper authorization could turn a fixable problem into a disaster. They were halfway to the atmospheric processor when they ran into their first obstacle, literally. Administrator Vex Nor, a junior Procyon official, stood blocking the maintenance corridor, their crystalline form glowing with bureaucratic indignation. Chief Engineer Harrison, Vex Nor's translated voice came through with that particular tone of disapproval that bureaucrats seem to perfect across all species. "You and your team are proceeding without proper authorization forms. I must insist that you return to your station and submit the required documentation for emergency maintenance procedures." James watched the pressure readings on his tablet spike dangerously. They didn't have time for this. "Administrator, with all due respect, we have a critical situation developing in the atmospheric processor. If we don't address it immediately, we're looking at potential cascade failures in life support." Nevertheless, Vex Nor insisted, their crystalline form pulsing with righteous protocol defense patterns, proper procedures must be followed. The safety of this station depends on adherence to established protocols. I have here the necessary forms. The Procien began pulling out a stack of documents that seemed to materialize from nowhere. That's when the first real alarm started blaring. Red emergency lights began pulsing along the corridor as the station's AI announced, "Warning. Critical pressure fluctuation detected in Atmospheric Processing Unit Alpha. Please consult Emergency Response Manual Section 47B for proper evacuation procedures." James made a decision. Roman, Lily, Plan Omega. His team moved with practiced precision. Roman began a lengthy and loud argument with Vex Nor about the proper filing procedures for emergency documentation, while Lily accidentally dropped her tablet, scattering digital forms across the corridor. In the confusion, James slipped past them and sprinted toward the atmospheric processor. Behind him, he could hear Vex Nor's translated voice rising in bureaucratic panic. "This is unprecedented. There are no protocols for this level of protocol violation. I must convene an emergency committee to establish protocols for dealing with protocol violations during protocol violation emergencies." James allowed himself a small smile as he ran. Sometimes the best way to deal with bureaucracy was to give it exactly what it wanted, more bureaucracy to deal with. Right now, though, he had a station to save, unauthorized tools and all. The atmospheric processor's access panel was right where it should be, covered in warning labels and security seals that he didn't have time to read. The pressure readings were now critical, and the whole corridor was beginning to vibrate ominously. James pulled out his unauthorized multi-tool and got to work, knowing that somewhere in the station, computers were probably generating enough violation reports to fill a small library. But that was a problem for later. Right now, he had a job to do, and he was going to do it the human way, quickly, effectively, and with absolutely zero regard for proper documentation procedures. The atmospheric processor's warning sirens had drawn quite a crowd. By the time James had his hands deep in the machine's internals, the corridor outside had filled with various alien species, all clutching their regulation manuals and looking horrified at his blatant disregard for proper maintenance procedures. The pressure regulators completely shot, James announced to Lily and Roman, who had finally managed to disentangle themselves from Administrator Vex Nor's impromptu documentation emergency. And it looks like it's taking the backup systems with it. That's impossible. Administrator Zyxtal had arrived, their crystalline form strobing with patterns that the translation matrix interpreted as extreme bureaucratic distress. The backup systems are triple redundant, with each redundancy individually certified by 3 separate safety committees. James pulled his head out of the access panel, his face streaked with mechanical fluid. "Well, you can file a complaint with the laws of physics if you'd like, but right now those triple redundant systems are failing. We need to shut down the main processor and switch to the emergency atmospheric generators." "Absolutely not." Zyxtal's crystalline form practically vibrated with horror. "The emergency atmospheric generation protocols require a minimum of 7 different authorization forms, each reviewed by a dedicated emergency response committee. The committees haven't even been formed yet." The station shuddered ominously, and several warning lights shifted from red to a particularly angry shade of purple. James watched as Lily checked her readings and gave him the subtle head shake that meant things were about to get much worse. "Administrator," James tried to keep his voice level, "in about 10 minutes, this processor is going to fail catastrophically. When that happens, we'll lose atmosphere control for the entire residential section. That's 3,000 people who won't have time to wait for committee approval. Then we must expedite the committee formation process." Zyxtal declared. "I'll immediately convene a committee to streamline the committee formation procedures. Once that committee has established proper protocols, we can begin forming the emergency response committees, which can then review the necessary authorization forms." Another violent shudder ran through the station. The angry purple warning lights began to pulse in a way that James had never seen before, and in his 15 years of space station maintenance, he'd seen a lot of warning lights. "Roman," James called out, making a decision that he knew would generate enough paperwork to fill the station's data banks twice over: initiate Protocol 0. A hush fell over the assembled aliens. Several Meraxians actually froze in mid-float, their tentacles rigid with shock. Administrator Vexnor's crystalline form briefly turned transparent, the Procyon equivalent of fainting. Protocol 0. Zwextal's translator seemed to struggle with the concept. There is no Protocol 0. I have memorized all 7,492 current station protocols, and there is no. It's a human protocol, Roman explained, already pulling tools from their secret compartments around the corridor. For when following protocols would kill us all. But that's a paradox. Vexnor had regained their opacity but was still swaying slightly. A protocol for ignoring protocols? The logical impossibility alone violates at least 15 different regulations. James was already back inside the access panel, calling out to his team. Lily, get to the emergency generators and prepare for manual activation. Roman, I need you to start evacuating the nearby residential sections. Don't bother with the proper evacuation procedures, just get people moving. This is unprecedented. Zwextal's crystal matrix was displaying colors that the translation system didn't even try to interpret. I must contact the Central Bureaucratic Authority. We need an emergency ruling on the legitimacy of unauthorized emergency protocols. The station's AI chose that moment to chime in, its serene voice somehow making everything worse. Warning. Atmospheric processor failure imminent. Please ensure all relevant documentation is properly filed before loss of consciousness due to oxygen deprivation. Thank you for your compliance. James watched his human team spring into action while the alien administrators descended into bureaucratic chaos. Lily was already sprinting toward the emergency generators, bypassing 3 different security checkpoints with tricks they developed over years of dealing with the station's overly zealous safety systems. Roman had begun the evacuation, using the universal language of urgent hand gestures to overcome the babble of different species' panic protocols. Administrator, James tried one last time. I understand this violates basically every regulation in the book. But right now we have a choice between breaking rules and breaking the station. Which do you prefer? Before Zwextal could respond, a new alarm joined the symphony of warnings, this one deeper and more ominous than the others. James recognized it immediately as the sound of the main atmospheric circulation system beginning to fail. The situation has escalated beyond mere regulatory violations. Zwextal announced, their crystal form pulsing with what might have been fear or bureaucratic epiphany. This now qualifies as a Class 7 emergency, which according to Station Protocol 5249, subsection C, paragraph 12, allows for temporary suspension of certain non-critical documentation requirements. James was already back to work, his hands moving with practiced efficiency among the processor's components. Does that mean we have permission to save everyone's lives? You may proceed with emergency repairs, Zwextal declared, but I must insist that all violations be properly documented, afterward. Deal, James grinned, pulling a highly unauthorized plasma cutter from his tool belt. Now, unless you want to see about 15 different safety regulations broken simultaneously, I suggest you look the other way for the next few minutes. The gathered aliens collectively turned their various sensory organs away from James's work, though he noticed that Administrator Vexnor was surreptitiously recording everything with their crystalline memory matrix. Probably for the inevitable inquiry that would follow. But that was a problem for future James. Right now, he had a station to save, and sometimes that meant doing things the human way, messy, improvisational, and effective. The sound of his plasma cutter drowned out the horrified gasps of the alien administrators, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear Lily's voice announcing the successful activation of the emergency generators. They might just pull this off, assuming the paperwork didn't kill them afterward. Station Director Kayla Winters stared at the maintenance report on her tablet, a headache building behind her eyes. 3 major system failures in the past week, and the Regulatory Council was still debating the proper form color for emergency repair requests. The latest crisis involved a critical power fluctuation in the station's main reactor core, and she knew exactly how this would play out. Director, this is highly irregular. Security Chief NX Vala's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with agitation as they floated into her office. The human maintenance crew has once again bypassed standard security protocols. They accessed the reactor control room without filing the requisite 17 permission forms. Kayla resisted the urge to point out that filing 17 forms would have given the reactor enough time to enter a catastrophic meltdown. Instead, she maintained her diplomatic tone. Chief, perhaps we should focus on the fact that the reactor is now stable. The Arcturian security chief's tentacles writhed in bureaucratic distress. But the protocols. A thunderous boom shook the station, cutting off NX Vala's protest. Emergency lights flashed as the station's AI announced, warning. Structural integrity compromise detected in Sector 7. Please consult Emergency Response Manual Volume 12 for proper panic procedures. Kayla was already moving, NX Vala trailing behind her like a distressed jellyfish. The emergency response teams would be assembling now, or rather, they would be assembling once they completed the proper emergency response team assembly documentation. She reached the crisis center to find it in chaos. The Regulatory Council members were huddled in one corner, frantically flipping through their manuals. 3 different species of alien administrators argued over the correct sequence of emergency protocols. And in the middle of it all stood James Harrison, looking like he'd aged 10 years since their last crisis. Report, Kayla demanded, silencing the room. Hull breach in Sector 7, James replied, his voice tight. The new, improved maintenance protocols the Council implemented last week. They've delayed critical repairs so long that we've got stress fractures spreading through the outer hull. One just gave way. Impossible. Councillor Zwexdal's crystalline form flickered with indignation. Those protocols were designed by our finest bureaucrats, with input from 7 different regulatory committees. Another boom echoed through the station. The stress fractures were spreading. The hull doesn't care about committees, James snapped. We need to seal that breach now, or we're going to lose the entire sector. I've got a team ready, but they haven't completed the required safety certifications for emergency hull repair. NX Vala interjected. According to Regulation 47B, subsection 12, paragraph. Enough. Kayla's voice cut through the chaos. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes, optical sensors, and various sensory organs of each being present. We have a choice to make. We can follow every protocol and watch this station tear itself apart, or we can trust the people who actually know how to fix things. The room erupted in protests. Councillor Zwexdal began citing regulation numbers. Chief NX Vala's bioluminescence reached previously undocumented frequencies of bureaucratic distress. Another violent shudder ran through the station. Warning lights shifted from red to purple, then to colors that weren't supposed to exist in the visible spectrum. Director, James spoke quietly, but his voice carried. My team can fix this. We've done it before. But if we wait for approvals. He left the sentence hanging. Kayla took a deep breath. What she was about to do would probably end her career, but at least there would be a station left to fire her from. Chief Engineer Harrison, she announced formally, you have my authorization to proceed with emergency repairs. Use whatever means necessary. The alien administrators froze in collective shock. Several Maraxians actually began to crystallize, their species equivalent of fainting. Director. NX Vala's translator struggled to convey their level of horror. This is unprecedented. There are no protocols for authorizing unprecedented protocol violations. Then we'll make new ones, Kayla replied, watching as James and his team sprang into action. Sometimes survival requires adaptation. Even for bureaucracy. As James's team raced toward the hull breach, already pulling out tools that would give the Safety Council collective aneurysms. Kayla turned to face the stunned administrators. I suggest we begin drafting those new protocols now. After all, we'll need something to show the central authority when they ask why we chose survival over paperwork. The aliens stared at her in silence, their various physiologies expressing different shades of bureaucratic shock. Then, slowly, Counselor Zewexdal's crystalline form shifted to a previously unknown color pattern. Perhaps, they said carefully, we should consider establishing an emergency protocol for reducing protocols in emergencies. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Now they just had to survive long enough to file the paperwork. 1 week after the Hull crisis, James found himself in an unprecedented situation, voluntarily attending a station protocol meeting. The conference room was packed with an odd mix of human maintenance crew and alien administrators, all gathered to discuss the implementation of the new protocol Omega. The integration of Procyon crystalline matrix with standard hull materials has exceeded all structural integrity projections, Lily reported, displaying holographic data that showed the repaired section glowing with health. We're actually seeing a 47% improvement in stress resistance. Fascinating, Administrator Zewexdal's crystalline form pulsed with analytical patterns. Though I must point out that this improvement comes at the cost of violating exactly 2,849 standard safety protocols. Which is why we're here, Director Winters interjected. We need to find a balance between necessary regulations and practical flexibility. The station shuddered slightly, causing everyone to tense. But it was just a standard gravitational adjustment, the kind of thing that happened dozens of times daily. What was interesting was how both humans and aliens had instantly looked to each other, ready to work together if needed. Our recent experiences have been educational, Zewexdal admitted. The human capacity for rapid adaptation and unorthodox solutions, while deeply disturbing to our sensibilities, has proven invaluable. And maybe we humans could learn something about preparation and thoroughness, James added, thinking of how the Procyon volunteers' careful approach had helped perfect the crystal integration. There's got to be a middle ground between 17 forms in triplicate and no documentation at all. The station's AI chose that moment to interject, warning. Current meeting has exceeded scheduled duration by 2.7 minutes. According to Regulation 459b, all overtime must be documented in. Override, Director Winters and Zewexdal said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. Well, Roman grinned, looks like some of us are learning to break rules already. The meeting continued, with humans and aliens working together to draft new emergency protocols that combined the best of both approaches. The Proxians suggested streamlining their documentation requirements, while the humans agreed to implement better safety checks and records, within reason. But their progress was interrupted by a new crisis. Warning lights flashed as the station's AI announced, "Alert! Quantum fluctuation detected in main reactor core. Traditional safety protocols are insufficient for current situation." Instead of panic, the room erupted into coordinated action. James watched in amazement as Administrator Zewexdal immediately pulled up relevant emergency procedures on their display while simultaneously announcing, Protocol Omega authorization granted. Human maintenance team, you have operational discretion. Lily, Roman, with me, James called out, already moving. Director, can you coordinate with the Procyon volunteers? We might need their crystal expertise again. Already on it, Winters replied, as Zewexdal began organizing their people with unprecedented efficiency. As they raced toward the reactor core, James realized something had fundamentally changed aboard Artemis 7. The aliens weren't just accepting human methods, they were adapting them, integrating them with their own approaches to create something new. They reached the reactor control room to find several Meraxian engineers already there, their tentacles manipulating complex diagnostic equipment. One of them turned to James and announced, "We've bypassed standard safety lockouts and prepared unauthorized tool modifications. We thought you'd approve." James couldn't help but laugh. You know that violates at least a dozen regulations. 15 regulations, actually, the Meraxian replied, their tentacles wiggling in amusement. We kept count. But we also filed the paperwork for Protocol Omega implementation. Simultaneously. We can multitask. The reactor crisis turned out to be less severe than feared, a quantum harmonic misalignment that they fixed through a combination of human ingenuity and alien precision. The Procyon crystal technology, integrated with human repair techniques, stabilized the quantum field in ways that neither approach could have managed alone. Later, reviewing the incident reports, now streamlined to a mere 3 pages, James reflected on how much had changed. The station's corridors buzzed with a new energy as humans and aliens worked together, learning from each other's strengths. He'd even seen a Procyon administrator using an unauthorized tool modification yesterday, though they'd carefully documented the violation in their personal log. Interesting times, Director Winters commented, joining him at his observation post. The Central Authority sent a review committee to evaluate our Protocol Omega implementation. Want to guess what they found? That we're violating every rule in their book. That we've had fewer accidents, better efficiency, and higher crew satisfaction than any other station in the sector, she smiled. They're considering implementing similar protocols across all stations. The station hummed around them, its systems running more smoothly than ever thanks to their new hybrid approach to maintenance and safety. In the distance, they could see a Procyon crystal matrix glowing softly within the hull, a permanent reminder that sometimes the best solutions came from breaking a few rules, and then writing better ones. 6 months after the implementation of Protocol Omega, Space Station Artemis 7 had become the model for a new era of human-alien cooperation. The Central Authority had sent observers from 12 different species to study what they called the Artemis approach, the unprecedented fusion of alien precision and human adaptability. James stood in the newly redesigned Maintenance Control Center, watching humans and aliens working side by side. Holographic displays showed the station's systems functioning at peak efficiency, while the Procyon crystal matrix integrated into the hull pulsed with healthy light. Chief Engineer Harrison, Administrator Zyxtal approached, their crystalline form displaying the new color patterns that had emerged since they began working closely with humans. The experimental maintenance protocols you suggested have reduced emergency response times by 82%. And your new streamlined documentation system actually helps us track problems before they become emergencies, James replied. Who would have thought, turns out some paperwork is useful after all. The station's AI, recently upgraded with both human and alien insights, chimed in, attention. Detecting quantum fluctuation in Sector 4. Implementing Protocol Omega response procedures. Human ingenuity and alien precision required. Instead of panic or bureaucratic paralysis, the response was immediate and coordinated. Lily led a team of Meraxian engineers toward the affected sector, their tentacles already manipulating diagnostic tools that combined alien technology with human modifications. Roman worked with a group of Procyon technicians, their crystalline forms glowing as they prepared emergency repair materials. Director Winters joined James at the control center. Remember when these situations used to cause station-wide crises? Now they're just Tuesday, James grinned, watching the combined human-alien team handle the quantum fluctuation with practiced ease. The Proxians provided their precise measurements and calculations while the humans suggested creative solutions to problems as they arose. Within minutes, the situation was resolved. The Central Authority is implementing Protocol Omega across the entire network, Winters announced. They're calling it the biggest advancement in space station operations since the invention of artificial gravity. And to think, James mused, it all started because we couldn't be bothered to file 17 forms to fix a broken pipe. The station hummed around them, its systems running more smoothly than ever. The halls were filled with a mix of species working together, learning from each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. Even the station's AI had evolved, developing a unique personality that balanced regulatory compliance with practical flexibility. We're receiving a priority transmission from Central Command, the AI announced. They're designating Artemis 7 as the first joint species training facility. We'll be receiving maintenance crews from across the galaxy to learn the new protocols. More paperwork? James asked, only half joking. Only 3 forms, ZYXTAL replied, their crystal matrix displaying colors of amusement. We're learning efficiency too, you know. A soft chime indicated another quantum fluctuation, but no one panicked. Instead, humans and aliens moved together with practiced precision, each bringing their unique perspectives and abilities to bear on the problem. The station's crystal-reinforced hull gleamed in the starlight, a testament to what different species could achieve when they learned to combine their strengths. You know what the best part is? Roman called out as he passed by with a toolbox that contained both regulation and modified equipment. We haven't had a mandatory safety briefing in months. Oh, we still have them, ZYXTAL corrected, their form pulsing with what had become their version of a smile. We just combined them with what you humans call happy hour. Turns out safety regulations are much more interesting with refreshments. The laughter that filled the control center was a mix of human chuckles, crystalline chimes, and various alien sounds of amusement. Space Station Artemis 7 had become more than just a facility, it was a living example of how different species could work together, growing stronger by embracing their differences rather than fighting them. As James watched his human and alien crews working together seamlessly, he realized they'd created something entirely new. Not just protocols and procedures, but a way of living and working that brought out the best in everyone. The future of space exploration would be built on this foundation, a perfect balance of human innovation and alien precision, of careful planning and bold improvisation. And if they had to file a few forms along the way? Well, that was a small price to pay for making history.